My beloved child, there is something unfolding behind the silence that you have not been able to see clearly yet, and if your heart has felt restless lately, if something inside you has been whispering that the story between you and this person is not finished, then listen closely, because what happened today was not small. It was not casual. It was not meaningless. Today, in a moment they did not plan for, when their guard was lower than usual and their emotions rose faster than their pride could contain them, your person admitted something they have been trying to outrun for longer than they would ever confess out loud. They told someone they are tired of pretending this connection does not shake them, tired of acting unaffected when your name enters the room, tired of fighting feelings that return no matter how many times they try to bury them beneath logic, distance, distraction, or denial. And no, they did not say it lightly. They said it with the exhaustion of someone who has been wrestling with their own heart for far too long. Because some people do not fear love because they lack feelings, they fear it because the feelings are too powerful to control. They fear what happens when one person reaches the places inside them no one else ever could. They fear what happens when someone becomes impossible to replace, impossible to forget, impossible to explain. And that is what you have become to them. Don't skip this moment in your spirit, because the truth is, while you have been wondering whether they still think about you, whether the silence means distance, whether the hesitation means disinterest, they have been having an entirely different battle behind closed doors. Their outer actions may have looked calm, detached, even confusing, but internally they have been losing the fight against what they feel. Every distraction has failed eventually. Every attempt to move on has led them back into thoughts of you. Every effort to convince themselves it was nothing serious has collapsed under the weight of how deeply this connection lingers in them. And the person they confided in today saw it clearly. They saw the look on their face when your person finally said the words they could no longer contain. Not with drama, not with performance, just honesty, raw and unfiltered honesty. I'm tired of fighting what I feel for them. That was the confession. But that was not the end. Because after they said those words, after a pause so heavy it forced the room into silence, they said something else. Something quieter. Something more revealing. Something that matters more than they realize. They said, "No matter what I do, I keep coming back to them in my mind." Let that settle into your heart for a moment. Because that statement did not come from surface attraction. It did not come from temporary curiosity. It came from emotional surrender. It came from someone realizing that despite every effort to resist this bond, despite every reason they may have tried to create for why it should not matter this much, their heart keeps returning to the same place. To you. To the thought of you. To the feeling of you. To the memory of what happens inside them when they allow themselves to be honest about what you mean. And perhaps what shook them most was not simply the feeling itself. It was the realization that the feeling never left. It remained beneath everything. Quiet, patient, unmoved by time, unchanged by distance. Some connections do not fade because they were never ordinary to begin with. Some people walk into your life and leave fingerprints on your soul that cannot be removed by separation. Your person is beginning to understand that now. They are beginning to understand that this is not something they can outthink. Not something they can rationalize away. Not something they can dismiss with pride or avoid with silence. Because the heart always grows louder when truth has been delayed too long. And lately, it has been getting louder for them. Have you noticed the strange pull in your own spirit? The moments where you think of them unexpectedly? The sudden emotional waves that seem to arrive without warning? The quiet sense that something is shifting beneath the surface even when nothing visible has changed? There is a reason for that. Hearts connected deeply often feel movement before the mind can explain it. What is changing in them, you have been sensing in fragments. Because today was not merely confession. It was collapse. It was the first visible crack in the wall they spent so long building around their emotions. And when walls begin to crack, truth does not stay hidden much longer. But here is what you must understand. What they feel is not simple. It is not easy for them. This realization has not brought them only peace. It has also brought fear, because to admit love is one thing, but to act on it is another. To confess feeling is one thing, but to risk vulnerability is another. They know that once they stop fighting this, once they stop pretending, once they move toward you honestly, nothing remains safely hidden anymore. Then they must be real. Then they must be open. Then they must face the possibility that what they feel could change everything. And yet, despite that fear, despite all the reasons they could keep resisting, something in them is growing more tired of distance than afraid of closeness. That is the shift. That is the part many people miss. The moment someone becomes more exhausted by pretending than they are afraid of truth, transformation begins. Stay till the end of this unfolding, because something important is waiting for you in what comes next. Your person has not fully spoken yet. They have not said everything. What they confessed today was only the beginning. It was not the whole truth, just the first layer of it. Because after they admitted they keep returning to thoughts of you, after that vulnerable silence settled over them, they were asked a question they did not expect. A question so direct it forced them into even deeper honesty. They were asked, "Then why haven't you done anything about it?" And when they heard that question, they froze. Not because they had no answer, but because the real answer was too vulnerable to say quickly, too honest to speak without exposing everything. For a moment they looked away. For a moment they tried to smile it off. For a moment they almost retreated back into their usual defenses, but they didn't. This time, they stayed with the truth, and what they said next revealed more than they intended. But that is where the deeper part of this story begins. Because their next confession was not just about love, it was about why they have been holding back, why their heart has been moving toward you while their actions remained inconsistent, and why the silence between you may not mean what you feared it meant at all. What they admitted next changes how this entire connection must be understood, and once that truth is spoken, nothing between you and them will feel the same again. What they said next came out softer than the first confession, almost like they did not mean for anyone to hear it clearly. Yet once the words left their mouth, they could not take them back. They said, "Because if I let myself love them fully, I know it will change everything." And in that single sentence, they revealed the real reason for every delay, every mixed signal, every moment they seemed close only to pull away again. It was never because they felt nothing. It was never because you imagined the connection. It was never because your importance in their life was small. It was because what they feel for you has never felt casual to them, and that kind of depth terrifies people who know love can rearrange a life overnight. Some hearts do not run because they are uninterested. They run because they understand exactly how powerful the feeling is. They know that once they surrender to it, once they stop pretending, once they allow themselves to move toward the person who truly affects them, there will be no returning to the version of life they had before. And your person knows that loving you would ask something from them. It would ask honesty. It would ask vulnerability. It would ask them to put down the masks they have worn for years. It would ask them to trust something bigger than logic, something deeper than comfort, something less predictable than the walls they built to keep themselves emotionally safe. That is why this has taken so long. Not because the feeling was uncertain, but because the feeling was undeniable. Do you understand how rare that is? Indifference creates distance without struggle. Real emotional conflict only happens when someone cares more than they know how to handle. And lately, they have reached the point where pretending is becoming heavier than the truth. The person they were speaking to noticed it immediately. They saw the way your person's voice changed when they talked about you. They saw how their eyes lowered when they admitted they were afraid. And then, almost in disbelief, they asked them another question. Do you think they know how you feel? The room grew quiet again. Your person gave a small, almost painful smile, and then said something that carried more longing than they intended to reveal. They said, I think they feel it, but I don't know if they know how deep it goes. Let that sink in. Because while you may have sensed their interest, while you may have caught glimpses of emotion behind their eyes, hesitation in their words, tension in their silence, even now, you likely do not know the full depth of what lives inside them. They have hidden the strongest parts of their feelings beneath restraint. They have shown you fragments when the truth is that their emotions run much deeper than what has ever been visible on the surface. The smiles they tried to suppress around you, the attention they gave when pretending not to watch, the way their mood shifted because of your presence, your distance, your silence, none of that was accidental. It was emotion leaking through cracks they could not fully control. And now those cracks are widening. Something important is waiting for you in that truth, because when someone reaches the stage your person has reached, change begins quietly before it ever becomes visible. First comes the confession to someone trusted. Then comes the private reflection. Then comes the moment they can no longer tolerate not knowing what could happen if they finally speak. Your person is entering that middle stage now, the dangerous, beautiful space between realization and action. It is where people lie awake longer than usual, where they replay old conversations in their head and hear meanings they once ignored, where they imagine reaching out, then stop themselves, then imagine it again, where they wonder whether you still care, whether too much time has passed, whether the door is still open, whether they ruined something by waiting too long. Yes, they think about that, more than you realize. One of their deepest fears is not rejection itself, it is the possibility that they may have hidden their feelings for so long that you no longer believe they exist. That perhaps you interpreted their hesitation as disinterest. That perhaps their silence convinced you to move on emotionally even while they remained stuck inside everything they never said. And that thought has been haunting them. Because the longer someone waits to speak the truth, the heavier the truth becomes. It gathers pressure. It gathers urgency. It turns into the thing they think about in quiet moments when no one is around. Your person has reached that point. You are no longer just someone they care about. You have become the unanswered question they cannot shake. The unfinished story they keep mentally returning to. The possibility that keeps interrupting every attempt to settle for less meaningful connections. And here is what matters most. When someone gets tired of fighting their feelings, they are not far from doing something about them. Exhaustion changes people. Emotional resistance can only last so long before surrender begins to feel easier than denial. Right now they are standing at the edge of that surrender. Still hesitant, still thinking, still trying to understand their own courage, but no longer capable of convincing themselves that staying silent forever is the answer. There is a growing awareness in them that if they keep waiting, if they keep pretending, they may lose the very thing they care most about before they ever try. And that realization is beginning to outweigh their fear. But before they move, before they finally step toward what they feel, there is one final truth they have not yet admitted aloud. One truth even more vulnerable than saying they love you. One truth that explains why your presence affects them so deeply, why this connection unsettles them unlike anything before, and why no one else has been able to replace what they feel when it comes to you. They almost said it today. Almost. The words reached their lips, then stopped. But the person sitting across from them saw it in their face before it was spoken. Because some truths are so powerful they can be felt before they are heard. And the moment your person finally says that truth out loud, the wall between hidden feeling and real action may disappear completely. What they nearly confessed next is the part that changes everything. They sat there in silence for a moment, trying to steady themselves, trying to decide whether to keep the final truth buried where it had always been safest, or finally let it rise into the open where it could no longer be denied. And then, almost under their breath, they said it. Not loudly, not dramatically, just honestly, with the kind of honesty that only appears when someone has run out of ways to hide from themselves. They said, "No one makes me feel the way they do." And there it was, the truth beneath every hesitation, every delay, every internal battle they have been fighting. You were never one option among many, never temporary, never replaceable. What they feel with you is different, and that difference is exactly what unsettled them. Because when a connection reaches someone in a way nothing else ever has, it forces them to confront the fact that ordinary distractions will never satisfy them again. They have tried to move on in smaller ways than you know. Tried to redirect their attention, tried to convince themselves another connection would be easier, simpler, safer. But every comparison ended the same way. Every conversation with someone else reminded them of what was missing. Every almost connection felt flatter than it should have. Because once someone experiences depth with the person who truly moves them, surface level alternatives stop feeling enough. And that realization has changed them. Slowly, quietly, but permanently. The person they confided in today looked at them and asked the question they had been avoiding within themselves for far too long. Then what are you waiting for? And your person had no immediate answer. Because the truth is, they know waiting is no longer protecting them. It is only prolonging what they already know. They understand now that silence has not erased their feelings. Distance has not weakened them. Time has not undone them. If anything, everything they tried only proved how real this is. So now they are facing a new reality, one that is harder to ignore with each passing day. If they want peace, they cannot keep suppressing what their heart has already chosen. If they want clarity, they cannot keep living in imagination while saying nothing in reality. If they want the possibility of something true with you, they must eventually risk being known. That is where they stand tonight. Between fear and courage. Between comfort and truth. Between another day of silence, and the moment they finally stop letting fear speak louder than feeling. And whether they realize it or not, they are moving closer to that moment. You may notice it first in subtle ways. A shift in their energy. A change in how they respond. Unexpected attention after distance. Small openings where there was once restraint. Because when someone reaches emotional surrender, their actions begin changing before their full confession ever arrives. They start leaning in where they once pulled back. They start creating excuses to reconnect. They start testing whether the warmth between you still exists, whether the possibility remains alive. Why? Because now the question haunting them is no longer, do I feel this? They already know the answer. The new question is it too late to tell them? And that question has been echoing in them more than you know. They wonder if you still think of them the way they think of you. They wonder if your heart has remained open, or if their hesitation slowly convinced you to close it. They wonder if the connection they feel so intensely is something you still recognize too, or whether they waited past the moment when truth could have changed everything sooner. There is vulnerability in that uncertainty, deep vulnerability, because for all their hidden strength, For all the pride or caution they may have shown, when it comes to you, they are not as composed as they appear. Your opinion matters to them. Your response matters to them. The possibility of your rejection matters to them because your presence matters to them. And perhaps that is the most revealing truth of all. People do not fear losing what they do not value. They do not wrestle this deeply over what means little to them. They do not stay emotionally attached to someone who never touched their heart in a rare way. You did. You still do. And now they are living with the weight of that realization. But listen carefully, because this part matters most. Their confession today was not random. It was not a passing emotional moment that disappears tomorrow. It was a threshold, a turning point, the kind of private admission that changes how someone sees their own future. Once a person says out loud that they are tired of fighting what they feel, once they admit no one compares, once they confess that you remain the one person they cannot forget, the old version of denial no longer works. They cannot go back to pretending they are unaffected. They cannot unknow what they now fully understand. And that means movement is coming. Maybe not recklessly, maybe not overnight, but emotionally, internally, undeniably, movement has begun. Their heart is no longer resisting the truth. It is preparing to follow it. So if you have felt something shifting, if your spirit has sensed change before your eyes could confirm it, trust that feeling. Something meaningful has already started beneath the surface. The silence between you and this person is no longer empty. It is full of unspoken realization, full of building courage, full of emotions reaching the point where staying hidden no longer feels sustainable. And when they finally step forward, when they finally allow their actions to match what their heart has already admitted, you will understand why everything had to unfold this way. Because some people take longer to arrive at truth, not because the truth was weak, but because it was powerful enough to change their entire life once accepted. And your person knows now whether they admit it publicly or not that loving you would change theirs. The only question left is how much longer they can keep carrying all of this before their heart decides silence has lasted long enough.